Welcome everyone to Beyond the Stamp, the postal issues every nonprofit mailer needs to know. I'm Nick Ellinger, and you won't hear from me, and that's a good thing for the educational content of this webinar. Did want to do a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. First, there will be the slides and the video of this available after the session. So don't need to ask. You can take as furious notes as you like, but you will have an opportunity to see it afterwards. We will send it out. Second, feel free to ask questions at any point. I'll be taking those questions and asking them to Carolyn. You can ask in the chat box or in the Q&A section. Either will work very much. With that, let me turn it over to Carolyn Angelini, who is Production Solutions Director of Resource and Postal Affairs. So Carolyn, please take it away.
Thank you, Nick, and thanks for everyone for joining us today. So let's dive in. I'm Carolyn Angelini. I'm the Director of Resource and Postal Affairs at Production Solutions. I'm passionate about postal topics, and we're going to talk today about the new rate-making rules, the USPS's 10-year strategic plan, a bit about mail delivery trends, and to review some action items for mailers. So let's get into the rate making rules themselves. So we all know that rates went up just 2 months ago in January. So why are we talking about them again so soon? We're here to talk about what the end of the PRC's 10-year review means to nonprofit mailers, because we are facing some very unprecedented changes ahead. Before we dig in, I want to mention a little bit about the PRC, the Postal Rate Commission, since they're going to come up throughout this presentation. PRC is an independent federal agency that provides transparency and accountability of the Postal Service operations. It's made up of 5 commissioners. Currently, there's 2 Democrats and 3 Republicans, 3 which were newly assigned in 2019. They are appointed by the president by and with the Senate advice, and they have 6-year terms. The PMG the Postmaster General has no direct power over the moves that the PRC makes. In fact, the structure was put in place to ensure exactly that doesn't happen. So what rule has been in place, right? What were the rules that kind of went, that were in fact why we have the January price increase? So we want to take a step back. The previous rate-making rules signed in by President George W. Bush in 2006 was the first major overhaul of the Postal Service since 1970. And within that rule, it reorganized the PRC and it established market dominant versus competitive pricing. So many of you on the call today are going to be nonprofit mailers. You're most interested in what we call market dominant, meaning the post office has got a monopoly on them. No one else is competing with, say, first class mail or marketing nonprofit flats. Competitive pricing, it corresponds to the parcels, the areas in which the Postal Service competes with FedEx and UPS and the likes. So this is the rule we've been working within. It's the rule in which the Postal Service has been able to raise rates, and the last rate increase we saw in January. So keep in mind that when the rates changed in January, that the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, was at 1.46%. It was less than half of what it was in 2006 when the original law was put in place. At that point, it was trending around 3 to 4%, which was a nice percentage point in which the Postal Service could actually use those funds to incorporate the rate changes. What happens is there's a basis of CPI. It was around 1.46%. Post office can use that pool of money and allocate it certain amount to first class mail, certain amount to letter mail. That's how they kind of make the sauce behind the rate changes. It also stipulated 6 days a week delivery in addition, and it compelled the USPS to pre-fund in advance for postal retiree benefits. So why new rules now? Basically, there was a stipulation in the Postal Accountability and Enhancement Act that required them that after 10 years, they need to review the rules to see if they were effective. And the conclusion was that the system was largely successful in achieving the goals related to the structure and the rate making system. However, the commission decided that it did not have increased pricing efficiency. It had maintained the financial health of the Postal Service as it had intended, but it didn't achieve short-term financial stability. Both medium-term and long-term financial stability measures had not been achieved. So in addition, high quality service standards had not been met during the course of the 10 years. So the PRC initialed rule-making proceedings in December of 2016, and there were a handful of proposals and extensive commentary over the past 4 years. So if it feels like this is coming out of nowhere, that's not the case. In fact, these new rules are somewhat long overdue. Still, it's unfortunate that we've had to wait this long for a new pricing structure that many feel is unjust. This isn't new rate making proposals that we're talking about. These are new rules. These are all set. They are final. They meaning that there is no pending approval. This is hardline new playing field in which postage prices are going to be determined. In fact, the new rule went in place back in January 15th. There's no opportunity for us to comment on the rules themselves, which is why there's an effort to appeal the rules. We'll talk about the timeline a little further down in the presentation. So moving on, what are these new rules, right? So in addition to the CPI rate authority that I just talked about, right, that we've had since 2006, because that's not going away. The new rules include that. So in addition to that, there are 4 surcharges. And the next few slides are going to go a bit in the weeds, so bear with me. First, I'm going to dive into what these 3 surcharges look like. So there's a density surcharge. The density surcharge is based on the amount of mail that's going to a particular mailbox. So I put the fun fact in there below. Think about it like this. Year over year, this country generates new deliverable addresses. So new mailboxes that the post office has to deliver to under the universal service obligation. But in fact, the amount of mail going to those mailboxes has been reducing over the past 20 years as the mail volume has declined. So it costs the Postal Service more to go to that mailbox every day than ever before. They want mailers to pay for that. That's why there's a very significant percentage in future rate making that aligns the amount of density. All of this is baked into what they produce at the end of the year in their annual compliance report. That's their ACR. That's where the Postal Service at the year end needs to look at the data in terms of their performance and their financial results. And they hand that over to the PRC. And the PRC reviews that and says, yeah, looks okay. Go ahead and raise rates based on this. It's been a somewhat simple and simpler in the past because of the rate structure, but now it's going to become much more complex because of these surcharges. Let's talk a bit about the Retirement Pricing Authority. So back in 2006, when the post office had to take on the obligation of pre-funding retirement, there was no allocation for them to cover those expenses. In the new rate making, they requested that the PRC consider this, and the PRC has answered them. There's a surcharge to cover the Postal Service obligation to pre-fund retiree health benefits. To protect market dominant mailers from a large initial rate shock, this additional rate authority will be phased in over 5 years. So the annual recalculations ensuring ongoing accuracy during the phase-in period. PRC has estimated hypothetical retirement rate authorities over the next 5 years, and that's what's shown here. These will move. These are just estimates, but what you can focus on is that you have to add column 2 and column 3 together to get what this scenario looks like. And you can see it grows year over year. So 5 years down the road, we're looking at, close to a 5% value in rate increases where it's currently a little less than 1. So that's a little bit about the retiree portion. Next, let's talk about non-compensatory and compensatory classes. I mean, I can barely pronounce this word. So the whole underwater conversation started 4 years ago when the 10-year rate review began. And the concept is breaking down what classes of mail does the Postal Service make revenue on and which ones don't they? Many of us have known for quite a long time that they lose money when they're processing things like flats. They're just not efficient to process. Their FSS equipment rollout was poor, and they're just not processing them effectively. So under the new rate structure, the post office is allowed to pass on a 2% allocation based on non-compensatory classes. Now, this breakdown here is what it looks like today. Every time they file an ACD at the end of the year, this could shift. So currently, classes of first class mail and the USPS marketing mail letters, which is the bulk of, those two are the bulk of the nonprofit mail that everyone produces. Those are making money, so they don't get the 2%. But classes like flats and periodicals, some of our nonprofit, mailers use those services. Those have a 2% surcharge allocated to them because essentially the post office is saying they're not making money on them. So the next slide kind of walks through the thought of, does the post office need to charge us for these surcharges? And the answer is yes and no. So you can look at the column on the right and see what's bankable and what's not. Essentially, the Postal Service doesn't have to file a rate case. Like we're going to talk about the timeline, we probably think they are going to file, but they don't have to file. When they do file, anything that says no under the bankable means that they have to pass along those surcharges. All those other categories where it says it's bankable, they can actually hold on to those allocations and pass them along in future increases. So I think that's an important part of the story. It's because just because the post office files for rate changes in the next couple of weeks, perhaps, it doesn't necessarily mean that they have to be these significant percentages that everyone's talking about. So what could this look like? These percentages here for compensatory and non-compensatory categories basically equal about, close to 6.5% and then the 8.5%. CPI average is going to be based on the last time that they closed out CPI for the rate change we had in January, which is in August. So we're looking at less than a full year of consumer price index fluctuation, which currently is about 0.68%. So these are the best estimates that we have at this point, that if they were to file and they were to use going to use all of the allowed surcharge allotments and not bank any, that we would probably be seeing 6% on first class mail and marketing mail letters, and close to 8.5% on these other classes. And I do want to point out that there's no variation in the basis rates of the surcharges when considering nonprofit to commercial mail. So where it's not like commercial mail is being hit any differently. These are some examples of what the price impacts could be. Now, if you look at that first line on a first class retail letter, we could be looking at, say, a $36 per thousand increase. It's pretty significant for some of the nonprofits that are mailing a lot of single piece first class stamp mail. I took a look at a client of ours. I would say it would be a medium-sized museum mailer that mails about 18 million pieces a year. A little under 1 million of them are first class, about 17 million marketing mail, and the increases would total about $86,000 for them over the course of the next year, about a $5 per thousand increase. So when you consider that postage is typically the most expensive singular cost of your mail piece, you can get a sense of how these types of increases year over year would impact your profitability and ultimately your direct mail campaign volume. So what does the timeline look like? Things are already moving. So the start the clock actually happened at the end of December when the Postal Service submitted their calculations in that annual compliance report we've been talking about. So that's all the data that the PRC needs and has in hand to review. So the PRC has been going over that data, and we're expecting, honestly, probably in the next week for them to give their formal feedback. In all likelihood, they probably will say, things look good the way you presented them. You are now authorized to file a rate increase. The Postal Service is likely sitting, waiting for this news, and will file immediately, in which case there's going to be a 90-day implementation date. Now, the Postal Service typically increases rates on Sundays. The first week in July is July 4th, that Sunday. So we're thinking perhaps the earliest we'll see an increase is around July 11th, maybe July 18th. Now, keep in mind, this is hypothetical. The Postal Service does not have to file a rate change in the next few weeks, but they certainly have been signaling for months that they plan to do so. One other question that kind of comes up a lot recently is, well, what does this mean for future rate changes and how do I budget for this? We typically have been realizing a rate change every January. Based on the new rules and the structure and the fact that the Postal Service has to wait till the end of December to file their ACR every year, and the PRC has 90 days to review it, it is likely that if they file this summer, we'll probably see summer increases going forward, another increase in the summer of 2022, and thereafter summer increases, and that they wouldn't resume again in January of 2022. So what's going on now? Let's talk about the DC Court of Appeals. So the PRC issued the new rules at the end of November and were posted in the Federal Register in the middle of December. Very quickly, our friends at the Alliance of Nonprofit Mailers, along with other organizations like Postcom, filed a petition for review at the DC Court of Appeals. They asked for a stay order, which was denied, but they were allocated an expedited briefing schedule, which means that the appeals court said that they would look at it in a somewhat quick basis, but quick to them isn't quick to us. Their briefing schedule runs from mid-April through the end of July. We're being told that oral arguments will probably happen in September. Now, we've been saying we'll probably see a rate case happen before then, and if postage prices go up in July, even if the DC Court of Appeals has a ruling where they say, you know what, we agree, these rules aren't fair. The PRC and the post office need to go back to the drawing board. All of the rate changes and the costs that we've incurred as mailers, there's no refund capabilities there. We would essentially have to eat them and then look forward to new rules for a future rate change. So let's make sure your voice is heard. We're encouraging folks to write to the USPS Board of Governors, including the PMG. Obviously let them know about your nonprofit, how it's going to be impacted if they raise rates at these percentages. And keep in mind that similar increases could happen year over year, at least for the next 5 years, because this new rule that is in effect has a 5-year review period. We're encouraging folks to contact members of Congress. The TMPA has another town hall coming up again this Friday. They had one back on March 4th. And they've got, if you go to their website, they've made it super easy. They've got an really easy to use template to e-sign letters to Congress, and template letters where you can put them on your letterhead and put some details about your mission and your organization, really personalize it, and then direct it to your particular members of Congress. And we encourage everybody to take advantage of those, because now is the time to speak up and act and let people know, your thoughts. So that was a bit on the actual rate changes. Nick, do we have any questions?
Sure. So you had talked a little bit about the retirement surcharge and how retirements have to be pre-funded. Let me just set this one up on a tee for you. Is that the normal course of business that other folks would have to go through?
So no, the Postal Service is the only entity that is required to pre-fund retiree obligations. It is not normal. And that's why they're asking now in the 10-year strategic plan for Congress to actually call on Medicare to support that function, those functions.
And about 85% of the debt that the USPS incurred over the decade period that they looked at was because of that retirement mandate and nothing else.
Yes, yes, exactly. So the Postal Service, a significant portion of their debt is related to retiree services. And in fact, they stopped funding those retiree benefits a few years back, knowing that they just felt like it was detrimental to their business. All right, let's move on to the 10-year strategic plan. So delivering for America, this is hot off the presses. Postmaster General Louis DeJoy made it known pretty early in his tenure as PMG that the Postal Service was cooking up this plan. In fact, it was the summer of 2019 when our former PMG, Megan Brennan, during her conversations with congressional oversight committees, was asked to produce the plan. So the new PMG just picked up something and put his own spin on it, essentially. The plan was just released on Tuesday, and overall, it's like a sweeping overhaul of calling for delivery for America. It's aimed at reducing costs for the agency and gearing its operations more toward packages than mail. It's all wrapped up with 58 pages, a special area on the website, a lot of hoopla. So they're making a big deal out of the release. So what's really in this 10-year strategic plan? I'll preface this that each of us might have a different take on the contents of the plan, and these highlights are somewhat through my lens, but and my thoughts are that it reads as a total reset for the Postal Service, and its place in the express and parcel shipping market is very oriented around parcels. They are assuming that the historically high package volumes of the pandemic era will persist and reorient the agency around consumers who don't rely on the mail services we typically associate with the post office, like letters to Aunt Sally and bill paying, advertisements, nonprofit, mailings. They are very interested in fulfilling the consumption of parcels in the marketplace. Here's a quote from DeJoy actually just this week. He said, "I'm not out to capture the whole market or out to fill our network. We're out to get more packages on our carriers, get more packages in our trucks. We are the most trusted brand. I just want to become the most used brand." So the agency projects its package business will grow by 6 to 11% through 2025 as consumers maintain online shopping habits built during the pandemic, or that's what they're relying on. The Postal Service plans to open 45 package processing annexes. So those are like processing facilities nationwide to expedite shipping, and will look to replace mail sorting machines with parcel sorters. Infrastructure, the agency has needed desperately, they're saying, for years. But the changes coming appear very oriented to parcel processing and not the letter mail processing most of us on this call know is vital to our industry. So let's look at some highlights and focus on the elements that are important to nonprofit mailers. So a few things in there that are interesting. First of all, it preserves the universal service obligation for the 160 million addresses across the country. It retains 6-day-a-week delivery of mail and 7 days for parcels. That's good news. Remember, in the past, we were thinking that maybe they would go away with the universal service obligation. So it's nice to see that they still want to be in the business of mail. Reduces losses by 160 billion over the next decade, 40 billion in self-funded, what they call self-funded investments. Again, most of these are for parcel equipment, but they're just their investments in general. It's questionable whether they're talking about closing post offices or not. They basically say no, but then again, they say that they're going to be making shifts to orient facilities that are functioning for the communities, and it seems a little bit open-ended to me. It's somewhat autonomous. You know, they didn't do a cry out to Congress for a total postal reform, but they are asking Congress to pass new reform or legislation around the retiree benefits and integrate them into Medicare, which they say will save them $44 billion over 10 years. It tries to appease the unions, but I'm not sure that it is. Keep in mind that, you know, the PMG got a lot of slack from the unions when he, you know, came on board, and it'll be interesting to see how this plays out with them. It makes a big play on parcels that I'm talking about, and it targets 95% of on-time delivery across mail and shipping product classes. There's lots of other goodies in there. They project they will operate with a positive net income by 2023, break even by 2024. There's major restructuring of leadership, which is typical when a new PMG walks in the door. But most significantly, the plan changes the map of retail and delivery areas in the districts. Some of us have friends at the post office that we rely on, maybe where we enter mailings and we know these folks. Many of them are in flux now because their positions and their ranks they know that they're going to be changing. It speaks very highly about the benefits to postal employees. So that's a ploy to the unions. They talk about modernized transformed networks, best in class mail and processing facilities, environmental stewardship, new trucks, new uniforms, lots of good stuff. I would say it's going to be interesting to see how Congress plays this out when they have the official ask about the retiree health benefits, because that allotment for the surcharges under the new, you know, what we'll see as a new rate case is about 1%. So if Congress does pick up that ball and ask that Medicare fund those, perhaps 1% of the surcharges would essentially go away. DeJoy projected these steps would save the agency $58 billion over the next decade. The agency would make the rest of it up with the postage rate increases, with the new revenue, and their self-help model, which is basically essentially cutting costs in their processing, transportation, and administration efficiencies, and from increased revenues on parcels, which they estimate will be about $24 billion. So this chart just shows you kind of a base comparison of where a 10-year net income currently versus projected with the strategic plan looks like. Takes a projected negative $160 billion to a positive $0.2 billion net income with this plan. So what are the lowlights? Change is expensive. A lot of these things are going to come at the expense of mailers in these rate increases, which are coming around the bend. And there's changes to first class mail service, which I know many of you are interested in hearing about. So let's kind of focus on that for a few minutes. So the PMG and the plan talks a lot about misaligned processing networks and underperforming air and service transportation, but particularly air. And what this, I'm sorry, this is a little bit fuzzy because I pulled it out of their plan, but essentially this area in red is where the post office says they don't control first class mail. And they are saying that this is an area that's outside of their bandwidth in terms of impacting any change. And because even essentially over the last year with the pandemic and the air travel has been disrupted, this has impacted their delivery even more so. So they are out to take the majority of what travels by air and put it on ground transportation. Even despite the record election and peak holiday volumes in the past year, they are saying their utilization rate of mail sorting machines has fallen below 50% as their mail volume has continued to decline. So they're doing an overall review. This next slide talks about the actual changes in the first class service standards. So current first class mail 3-day volume will be subject to a 3 4 and 5 day service standard, depending on the distance between the origin processing facility, that's where we enter the mail, and the destination processing facility, the one closest to the mailbox. Because periodicals, and I'm not sure if we have any periodical mailers on the call today, but because periodicals travel with first class mail, their service standards will also change. In addition, first class parcel service standards will also change because the shift from less air travel to more surface transportation is going to impact their transportation routes as well. So the Postal Service plans to apply a 3 to 6 day standard to certain end-to-end periodicals merged with first class mail for surface transportation, specifying that the periodical standard would be equal the sum of 1 day plus the applicable first class mail service standard. So just plus 1 day. The shift will primarily take place within the 43% of overall first class mail volume that will shift from air travel to surface transportation. So essentially they're not, the stuff that's currently traveling on trucks is not going to be as impacted as the stuff that currently travels on air. So what's traveling on air is the stuff that's further away from your originating point, right? You're mailing from New Jersey and you're delivering in California. That's the stuff that's going to change. So 61% of current first class mail volume and 93% of current periodic volume will stay at this current standard. It's not going to be impacted. 81% of current 2-day first class mail will retain its 2-day standard. 70% of first class mail volume will receive a standard of 1 to 3 days. I'm going to go back a bit. So from 1971 to 2012, the post office had a 1-day delivery standard for a good portion of its first class mail. That 1-day standard actually was eliminated in 2015. So if this goes forward, this is not approved, right? But if it goes forward, it'll be the first real formal reset since that point. Now the media is having a field day on this one. I'm sure you can understand. And I would just encourage you to look at the facts and look at your mail and what delivery is happening on your mail. Because yes, these shifts are shifts. They are, formal service standard changes. And the USPS plans to deliver a significant portion of this first class mail within the current standards. Many of us just want them to meet the current standards, right? So like, heck, if they, I'd be cool with if mail delivered based on the current standards from what we've been realizing over the last 6 months. So this is an outline of what these changes look like. And the next slide, it actually shows you a comparison where you can kind of see percentage-wise what is currently a 2-day and 3-day standard shifting to be allocated over those 3, 4, and 5 days. So if you're interested, if you're passionate about this, I would encourage you to take part in a pre-filing conference. So even though it's in the USPS's 10-year strategic plan, it doesn't mean that they can roll it out. They actually need the PRC's approval. So there's a formal process taking place. PRC actually posted yesterday that, opening up a file for review. There is a conference scheduled with the Postal Service where representatives will be able to discuss their policy behind changing the service standards and listen to mailers. I think you can allocate your questions. That's on April 6th. And again, this is just a proposal. They can't act on it until it's actually unapproved by the PRC. So what's going on with the politics around all this stuff, right? So DeJoy rolled out his plan as Democrats have renewed calls for his ousting and the removal of the agency's governing board, the Board of Governors, which backs him up, and the proposals. Last week, more than 50 House Democrats asked Biden to fire the board's 6 seating members for cause, citing gross mismanagement, self-inflicted nationwide mail delays, and rampant conflicts of interest, and to allow a new slate of nominees to consider DeJoy's ability to be in office. So Biden's already has nominated 2 Democrats and a voting rights advocate to fill 3 of 4 vacancies on the Board of Governors. Ron Bloom, the board of chairman, and a Democrat, is serving in a 1-year holdover term on the board. If all of these folks are confirmed by the Senate, the Democrats and Biden appointees would hold a 5-4 majority with the votes to remove DeJoy if they wanted to. So the president can't fire DeJoy. It has to happen at the Board of Governors. Board of Governors was pretty Republican filled. It is on the path to be a bit more Democrat filled. So they could be in a position to get rid of him if they wanted to in the future. Postal operations are purposely insulated from the presidency and Congress to prevent politics from tinkering with the mail system for political gain, or so they say. The Postmaster General always answers to the Board of Governors. I thought an interesting tidbit, I'm not sure if people realize, is that the Postmaster General was appointed by the US president and a member of the president's direct cabinet up until the point the PRC was created under the 1970 Postal Reorganization Act. So the American Postal Workers Union released a statement relaying deep concerns about aspects of the plan and that it would slow down mail and reduce access to post offices. At the same time, though, the union applauded other measures set out in the plan, like hiring 11,000 additional career workers for sorting facilities, building the 46 new annexes for parcels we're talking about, the investments to improve retail locations. So that jury's still out on that, on whether the unions are a go or not. Let's not forget the pressure DeJoy was under in the fall that many, myself included, believe stemmed from the postal unions. And we seem to have a president in office that is very supportive of the unions in general. So on February 24th, the PMG and stakeholders on legislation proposals to help the USPS and on postal reform. So they met at the House Oversight Committee hearings. Many of you saw that in the news, et cetera. And the House Oversight and Reform Committee is demanding that the Postal Service release a contract with a private company for a new delivery vehicle fleet that is reportedly worth up to $6 billion. So that just happened on Friday. Committee Chairman Carolyn Angelini sent a letter to the PMG voicing several concerns about potential interference and asking for documents related to the contract. And the Postal Service is contracted to purchase up to 165,000 of these new fuel efficient or electric vehicle. And they're saying that basically they don't think that they're going to fall in line with what Biden's plan is around the green initiatives. Oops, I'm sorry. What's happening at the post office while all of this is going on? So the plan that was just released on Tuesday has in it some activities that have been underway. So this restructuring of leadership and operations, things like this don't need the PRC's approval. Only certain elements of the plan need the PRC or say Congress approval to act on. So there's a lot of restructuring and focus on that. And some of the initiatives have been underway, for months at a time. While this is going on, the USPS is, cash flow, cash holdings, things look kind of better than they have in the past because of all the parcel revenue that came in last year. They have made some moves to use some of the funds in the $10 billion grant related to the pandemic related expenses that they were allocated. Because you remember under the original CARES Act, they received monies under that, in the form of a loan, which they never took. So to date, they have not really tapped into any of this pandemic related funding, but they are in the process of it now. Is there any questions about the actual 10-year strategic plan, Nick?
Not seeing any.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about mail delivery trends. So what's going on with mail delivery? So this is just basically synopsis about 2020. Overall, what we saw for 2020 was, and on average, delivery was very similar to 2019. Yes, things were slow. And if you read through this passage, they get slower and slower as the year went on. But because in the beginning of the year, the mail volume fell out of the marketplace at the onset of the pandemic, nonprofit mailers were in the mail some people pulled back, but a lot of people didn't. And the commercial mailers vanished overnight. So when the commercial mail volume dropped out, our nonprofit mail was able to actually push through the system quite quickly. So mail started like normal in the beginning of the year, sped up, and then slowed down, and then got really slow towards the end of the year. But the model changed completely for the year. But when you look at the overall year-over-year averages, they're very similar when you think about the 12-year time period. Sorry. So what do things look like so far right now? Now this is information that's based on not on USPS data, but based on some of the mail trends that I review. First class mail in Q1 is trending a day and a half longer than same period last year. So unfortunately, this prolonged first class mail trend is that we have been seeing for about 6 months. It continues to go on, and a lot of folks think it's not going to change. In fact, this is all part of the story about the service standards changing. This is the new reality in some ways. Marketing mail, yes, between the middle of November and the middle of January really was impacted because Postal Service was pressured to handle all of the parcel influxes. I'm sure most of you know, FedEx and UPS couldn't handle parcel volumes. The post office had to pick it up. Certain processing facilities were, miles long delays of getting mail processed. They weren't operating based on FIFO principles, and certain facilities were running quite well, other ones not so much. So overall, marketing mail has come back, but is still trending about a half a day to 3/4 of a day longer through Q1 so far than Q1 of the last year. So, big question for me will be, if they do change service standards for first class mail, what does that mean? Does it mean they're just allocating them to be somewhat what we are currently realizing, or are we talking about pushing them out even further because they will in turn not even meet what they set their obligations to be? Because that's what we're used to now, right? They set the bar and then they don't meet it. So we hope that if they set the bar or reset the bar, that they are going to meet it. That's what they're saying they're going to do, but we'll be mindful and watch that. The other thing that we'll be watching, are they planning on changing other service standards? Will there be changes to marketing mails and say other, flats particularly is one that I'm interested in. Are they going to change the metrics for that? What's upcoming? So let's go through some action items for mailers. What can you do? Because this is a lot of information, right, Carolyn? This is a lot. What am I supposed to do here? So here's just a quick outline of things that perhaps maybe you should be thinking about. I would encourage all of you to stay informed and close to your agency and supplier partners. That they're going to be on point with what's happening with the PRC and the post office, and cut out some of the noise in the media that you're reading. Rely on them, right? Review your budget and your mail plans. I can't sit here and say for 100% sure that postage rates are going up with those percentages in July, but it sure does seem like it is. And if you haven't reviewed your budget and your mail plan yet, I'd encourage you to do so and reset the expectations for next year. Pick up the pen, write the Board of Governors, write the Postmaster General, let them know how this is impacting your nonprofits. Be aware and support the Alliance of Nonprofit Mailers effort at the DC Court of Appeals. Use the Nonprofit Alliance, the TNPA's templates, to urge your members of Congress to persuade the Postal Service to restrain its use of any new authority until 2022 at the earliest. We want them to, place a hold on any changes until the DC Court of Appeals has completed their review. I'm a huge advocate of tracking your mail, both inbound and outbound. If you're not tracking outbound, please contact a subject matter expert. Many folks of us in the industry happy to walk you through it. If you are tracking outbound mail, right, all of your direct mail that's going out, I'd encourage you to consider tracking your inbound response. all of this reorganization and service standard changes in the 10-year plan are going to create chaos at the post office. So be an advocate of your mail and quick to point out if you think there's an issue or a delay going on, because they are going on. So be aware of them. And let's be honest, they couldn't keep up with the changes of the influx of parcels during the 2020 holiday parcel situation. So it's all eyes wide open on what's happening when they have changes down on paper that they're making. It's important to understand the changes in the delivery curves not only affect when donors get your mailings, but also when their response mail is coming back to you. So, if you typically look at these response curves and plan your mailings around them and your revenue around them, I just encourage you to just take a look. Perhaps they haven't been as impacted as one might think, but many are looking and kind of reviewing, well, when am I going to put my mailing out, knowing it's going to take another day to get in-house? Or let me look at the curve of when I typically get responses back to the cager for my response vehicles and my revenue, and how will that impact my my profitability. Now is not the time to assume that typical patterns are what is occurring on your mail. So that's basically a wrap up of what I had included. I've got, if anyone has any questions, if anything else has come in.
Sure. While we're waiting for questions to come in, one thing that should mention as you're writing your legislators, one of the lines that is coming out of the Postal Service is there is an economic study that alleges that if prices go up, demand is inelastic, meaning that even if prices go up, the amount of mail will be the same thing. It does take a special level of economist to be able to say that when you increase prices and have worse service, you're going to have the same amount of customer level. But that's what the argument is. And so when you're talking to legislators, emphasizing that this will not only decrease the amount of donors that you're able to bring in, and it will decrease the amount of mail that you send, will help give lie to some of the rhetoric that's out there that's a little bit odd, shall we say.
I agree with you, Nick. Yeah.
Any questions or comments, things that we didn't cover that you want to hear about the mail? We have a question, is there information on delivery rates? This person's organization saw mail improperly sorted and not delivered in November, and they didn't get a lot of checks sent by mail in December and January. Is there missing mail?
So I would say this. So delivery service standards are coming back. I don't have any stats here on hand to share, but we do review them closely. So the post office, their service standards they just actually released look much more promising than they had a couple months back. What was happening was that back, from starting in mid-November, facilities just couldn't handle the influx of parcel volume and were beginning to either hold mail and process newer mail before that, or they were actually sending mail to other facilities that, nearby facilities, because they had a little bit more availability. As a whole, because we look at a lot of different issues that pop up, first class single piece mail was impacted the most. Next to that, anything that was mailed at local origin, whether it be a pre-sorted letter campaign or a pre-sorted flat mailing, would have been impacted right behind that first class pieces. So it's a best practice now. If there's more reason than ever to work with, say, a commingler or to drop ship your mail, because you're bypassing a lot of the steps that the post office has to take, and you have a better chance of getting in home based on what your objectives are. Post office is doing a better job too. While all this was going on, I do have to give them some kudos because they were trying to be as proactive as possible in sharing this information. And part of the 10-year plan encourages them to use new reporting that would actually show a mailer. Like you'll be able to see, oh, I'm gonna, enter mail in St. Louis, and wow, I can look on this dashboard and see that St. Louis is operating 3 days behind. So maybe I won't enter that mail in St. Louis. I'm gonna drive it to a nearby post office and enter it. There's gonna be that type of data analytics in terms of throughput from the Postal Service and a visibility in the future. That's part of their plan. But to answer the main question, things have been getting better overall. I don't have percentages on hand though, but I could certainly get them to that particular person if they're interested.
And what, Devin, what you're saying is about delays in December. A lot of folks were seeing that. I remember Carolyn telling me that it was really the worst month on record. And on record's the operative part there. I'm sure there were some times during the Pony Express days that delays were a little bit worse than they were. But that December was uniquely bad. We did see kind of a glut of those coming in toward the end of January. And then for caging facilities, looking at what's coming into Aegis, one of our caging facilities, February was up significantly. And so the things seem to be moving a little bit more through the snake, as it were. So my hope is that your mail wasn't missing in December and January, but that it turns into February's mail.
Yes, yeah. The post office isn't throwing away mail. It's just in certain facilities moving slower. Certain facilities, and these metrics are available like on a facility by facility and region basis. You can see certain facilities and areas, everything's fine, hunky dory, but in other ones were backed up. Personally, I live in the Philadelphia area, and this was notoriously, backed up, and not just because of parcels, but because the Postal Service was dealing with pandemic related workforce constraints, hiring constraints. They did try to go out and hire a bunch of temps and temporary people. That actually didn't work all that well. They couldn't get them in fast enough, and they couldn't get them qualified.
And other facilities that I'd seen on your lists more frequently than others, Detroit seemed to have issues. New
Baltimore
York have issues. Baltimore,
yeah,
and Philly were the ones that I kind of saw over and over again. Occasionally, get some other ones in there, but
those were the significant hot spots for sure. And I would just, if you think your mail's not being like normal, figure out what your basis is by tracking your mail. And then if you think something's wrong, honestly, there's so much data available in terms of informed visibility. Pick up the phone, call the post office. There's people that'll take your call and help you find your mail. You just need to find the right people in the Postal Service to work with, or suppliers, obviously partners, mail tracking providers that can help you. Yes, it happens where we pick up the phone and call a facility and say, hey, we know you've got our mail there. Go walk the floor, find it, and dust it off and keep it moving. So sometimes it takes that to get a little push. You hate to think that that's the case, but sometimes it requires it.
And Carolyn, we did get a follow-up on that question about December and January. They've confirmed with several donors who have sent checks in December and January, and their mail never arrived. And so that may be some level of deeper issue.
Yeah, and that's where, I would just encourage that, that individual to reach out with their partner. I'm always available, and that takes a bit of investigation. Let's look at the mail piece, where's it coming back to? Was there an issue? Is the issue with the Postal Service, the entering mail, the delivery area, was there a PO box issue? There's so many things that could impact that. Sometimes it's not the post office, it's some of the cagers that are the issue. So it all depends. Again, I encourage, for all these reasons that we're talking about here, it kind of validates tracking your mail, because it's going to give you greater control, greater visibility on what's going on.
And I know you gave your email address at the very beginning, but would you mind reading it out again for folks to reach out to you?
Yeah, sure. It's it's Carolyn Angelini. So it's CANGELINI at uspsmail.com. And I'm on LinkedIn. Anybody can reach out to me if you have any questions. I'm happy to help.
Yep. And if you wanted to talk to me, not entirely sure why, because Carolyn's the expert on this, but feel free to reach out at nellinger@moredmgroup.com. Thank you, Carolyn, and thank you all for spending so much time with us here today. Hope it was valuable for you. And we will send out slides and recordings.
Perfect, Nick. Thank you, everyone.